In this episode, we are going to discuss constructors and destructors, as well as very important concept in any object-oriented programming language called dependency injection. Let's start with constructors. At php.net, we can read that PHP 5 allows developers to declare constructor methods for classes. And now, just to clarify, it's not just PHP 5, it's from PHP 5, because PHP 7 also uses constructors, obviously. Classes which have a constructor method call this method on each newly created object, so it is suitable for any initialization that the object may need before it is used. Then we have a note: parent constructors are not called implicitly. If the child class defines a constructor, in order to run a parent constructor, a call to parent constructor within the child constructor is required. We will show this a little bit later on when we actually go into use parent constructors, so don't worry about this if you don't quite understand what that means. If the child does not define a constructor, then it may be inherited from the parent class just like a normal class method, if it was not declared as private. Usually constructors are public, but there are cases where you would want to set it as private. We will cover this a little bit later on as well. Okay, if we scroll down, then we have for backwards compatibility with PHP 3 and 4. If PHP cannot find constructor, in a sense, underscore construct with the brackets, function for a given class, and the class did not inherit one from the parent class, it will search for the old style constructor function by the name of the class. Effectively, it means that the only case that would have compatibility issues is if the class had a method named underscore construct, which was used for different semantics. In other words, you don't really create the method with this name because this automatically indicates that it's a constructor. Now, old style constructors were basically methods with the same name as the class name. So if we had, let's say, our class books, and then you had a method books within this class, it would act as a constructor. But we don't use it. As you can see, this warning: old style constructors are deprecated in PHP 7. And these days, PHP 7 is pretty common. We are pretty much leaving PHP 5 and start working with PHP 7 full-time now. So please make sure you don't use any old style constructors. I won't be showing you any examples with old style constructors. We're only going to be using this underscore constructor anyway. And then we have, unlike with other methods, PHP will not generate an strict level error message when construct is overridden with different parameters than the parent construct method has. Let's say you have a parent class with constructor which has, let's say, 2 arguments, and then you override this constructor from within the subclass with different number of arguments. So it will not generate this error. And I think that's enough reading for now. So let's go back to our editor and let's open our basket.php file. What we are going to do is, after our private items property, we are going to declare the constructor. So public function underscore construct. And what we are going to do is pass the argument to this constructor. It's going to be a required argument, so we won't assign any default value to it, and it's going to be the array of items. If we wanted this constructor argument to be optional, we could set it to an empty array, but we want this argument to be mandatory. So this items, now we are associating whatever has been passed through as an argument with our items property. So in other words, rather than using add method, we can now just pass all these items in the array format and they will be automatically associated with our property. Let's add the doc block here, and it's basket constructor, and it takes an array of items. That's fine. Let's now go back to our index.php, and what we're going to do here first, as you can see, my IDE automatically highlights it. It tells me required parameter items is missing. So if we were to run this code without actually passing any argument, look what's going to happen. There we go. Fatal error, uncaught type error. Argument 1 passed to basket construct must be of the type array, none given. In other words, if we have a constructor and it has any required arguments, in other words, arguments that don't have any default value associated with them, then we must provide it when we instantiate in the new object using this class. So in order to do it, we need to append the set of brackets, then the array, and even an empty array should be enough. So if we save it, preview it in a browser, and there we go, the fatal error is now gone. But we would use it to put all these items that we add in here using this method, which is also valid approach. Obviously, we can still keep this add method if we want to, or we can just add items when we instantiating the class. I'm going to add them just with the constructor. So banana equals 2, then we have apple equals 5, then we have lemon equals 3. So we have 2 bananas, 5 apples, and 3 lemons. And we can now remove these add statements. If we save it and preview it in the browser, you'll see the result is still the same. It's still 10. And the display count obviously is only the constant which we've declared in the previous video within our JSONable interface. So obviously result wouldn't be affected whether or not we pass the argument through the constructor or we've added items manually using add method. But as you can see, everything still works fine. There was no fatal error. So the constructor now, if we look at the class, we should have all these items that we just passed through as an array now associated with this items property. And how can we actually find out what all these items are? Well, let's quickly use one of the methods that we already have. Let's use basket to string, for instance. Save it, preview it in the browser, and there we go. All these items are displayed in exactly the same way as when we were using the add method to add all these products to our basket class. If we were to if we scroll up, make this argument optional, we can now remove all these things. We can remove it, and we can even remove the brackets, because now we are not required to provide any argument to the constructor of this class. But I'm going to keep it the way it was. So we're going to have it as mandatory item. Even if it's optional, we can obviously still put this item in, and then it's going to be associated with the property. So everything is going to still work just fine. But I will remove this optional option here, in other words, the default value associated with the argument. Now we obviously can pass more than one argument to the constructor, exactly the same way as we could do with any function or method within a class. So let's just add another one. I'm using PHP 7, so I can use type hinting for scalar types like integer, string, and so on. So I'm going to add new integer, and I'm going to have it as category ID, for instance. Category ID, and I'm going to first of all add it to the doc blocks, and then I'm going to instantiate it. Category ID equals category ID, and now let's add this property here. Private category ID is going to be of an integer type, so var integer. And now obviously once we've instantiated this class, and now again you can see this is automatically highlighted because our category ID is not an optional argument, it's a mandatory one. It doesn't have any default value associated with it, so we need to pass this category ID. If we want to, we can specify the default one. Let's say 1 would be the default one, and now this highlight is gone. But let's leave it without any default category. So after our first argument, which is this array, comma, and let's put 1, for instance, to indicate the ID of the potential category that we might have for our basket. Okay, now that we have this constructor run when we instantiate in the class, whatever we do after, these items are automatically available. So if we now, let's say, use this add method, then this add method will add to the already existing list of items, because obviously we have already associated this items array with the items property. So it's not an empty array at this point. It already has some items. Our category already has an ID of the category associated with it as well. So all these items within this class, when the class is instantiated, it will automatically have this have these values associated with its properties. Now, we don't really need this category ID, so I'm going to remove it. We will keep these items, and now I'm going to show you how we can actually use this constructor from within the parent class. What I'm thinking of, these items with a constructor, and then this add method, even this display count method, then we have get, remove. All these methods, they could be used in more than one place. So I'm going to cut it all, and I'm going to only keep the methods to array, to JSON, and to string, obviously with this join helper method. And what I'm going to do is create another class, parent class, which this one will extend, and this class is going to be called collection. And this collection is going to be an abstract class. I don't want this class to be instantiated on its own, and I'm going to paste what I just cut from within the basket. Now this display count, I don't really need. This was just to show you actually that we can use this constant. We can actually remove this constant from JSONable. It doesn't really make much sense here anyway. So we have items property, we have our constructor, we have add, get, and remove methods. So now from within the basket, we are going to extend collection. There we go. So we're extending this collection class. So now we have items, access to these items, but as you can see, it highlights these items automatically. And this is because we are trying to access the property, as you may remember. If we want to have access to the properties of the parent class, these properties, or even methods if we are trying to access them, have to be either public or protected. And what do we have them as? We have this items property as private. So obviously this items property is only available within this collection class, not within the classes that extend it. So in order to make it available to the class that extends this collection, we need to make it either protected or private. And I think protected is going to be just enough. We don't want anyone to access this property from outside of the class when we're instantiating the class and then trying to access methods or properties. We don't want them to be able to call this items property directly on the new object. So protected will allow us to get access from within a class that extends it, but not from outside of the class, which is exactly what we want. So now that we have this collection class, which we are extending from within a basket class, you'll see that we still have access to this constructor. If we check this index, you can see everything is still valid. We need to add this file to the require statement, so collection.php. And if we now save it and preview it in the browser, you will see that everything works exactly the same way as it did before. Only now, rather than having all these methods and the property, including this constructor within the basket class, we simply extended the collection, and we already learned about parent and sub classes, obviously, and how to extend other classes. So that's nothing new to us. The only thing is that obviously you can see that constructor can be declared within the parent class, and that's obviously going to be inherited from the parent class from within a class that extends it. Another thing, if we go back to the index.php, you can see we still have two arguments. We have first argument is array, and then we have integer as the second argument to this constructor, even though the constructor only takes one argument. But you can pass more arguments to any method, including a constructor or destructor later on that we're going to be discussing. Then they are declared, but you cannot pass less than they are declared as mandatory items, obviously. So we can have just one declared, but if we pass two, it's not going to hurt anyone because we can still try and obtain any remaining possible argument that this method could receive. Okay, so let's just remove this integer from here. I think that's enough about the constructor for now. We will get back to the constructor in just a moment, but before we get to the dependency injection, let's go back to the browser, go back to php.net, and let's scroll down to the Destructor. Now, just to let you know, the Destructor isn't as commonly used as constructor. Constructor is a pretty common thing across many classes that you will be building. Not all of the classes have constructor, but many of them do. Now, Destructor, I can't remember I ever used it in any of my project, but it is there obviously if you need it, so it's worth to know obviously what it can do. And again, PHP 5 introduces a destructor concept similar to that of other object-oriented languages such as C#, C++. The destructor method will be called as soon as there are no other references to a particular object or in any order during the shutdown sequence. And there we've got a example. And again, these notes under the example, like constructors, parent destructors will not be called implicitly by the engine. In order to run a parent constructor, one would have to explicitly call parent destruct in the destructor body. Also, like constructors, a child class may inherit the parent destructor if it does not implement itself. And now we didn't try this actually, this parent constructor from within the child and then actually calling this parent constructor. We will do this in just a moment as well. But let's just go back to the editor and try this destructor. So if we go back to, let's go to the basket. In this case, we inherit constructor from within this collection class, but let's create a destructor because it's going to be only a temporary measure here. We're not going to be keeping this destructor here. It's also public function underscore underscore, rather than construct this time is going to be destruct. There we go. And this one, what I'm going to do is simply echo something. Destructor is called, just to show you when it's actually called. And if we go back to our index.php, what I'm going to do after this toString method, I'm going to echo new line, so we can see things on new lines. And then I'm going to do basket equals null, basically destroying the instance of this object. So this basket variable no longer stores the instance of the basket class. And then I'm going to echo new line again, and then echo after destructor. So this point, when we are actually destroying this basket instance by setting this variable to null, the destructor should be called. And if we save it, preview it in a browser, go back to our PHP course, refresh the page, as you can see, that's exactly how it happens. So we have first toString, this call, then we have a new line, and destructor is called because we've set the variable which stored the instance of this basket class to null. So this one was called, and then the line after we've set it to null, which is this after destructor. So as you can see, destructors are called when the object is being destroyed or when script terminates. Okay, let's remove all this because we don't need this. And again, from the basket, I'm going to remove this destructor. We don't really need it. Now, going back to what we've discussed previously, if I was to create constructor within a basket class, knowing that obviously we have one within the collection class, let's try this as well. So public function construct. And as you can see, my IDE automatically put exactly same argument as my constructor within the collection, and it straight away calls this constructor from a parent class. And how we calling this constructor on the parent class is parent, then scope resolution operator, these two columns, and then construct under underscore underscore construct with the argument which we need for this constructor from within a parent class. So that's how you would do it. If we, let's say, have more arguments than two for our basket class constructor, let's say we're going to have this integer again with category ID, then again we would have to pass it through as an argument here, but our parent constructor only takes array of items, and that's exactly what we're passing. We wouldn't be passing this second argument to this parent constructor because it doesn't take this second argument anyway. We could pass it, but it wouldn't do anything with this, because if you have a look at this constructor in the parent, it doesn't do anything with any additional potential arguments that we might receive. So that's how you would do it, basically. If we were to remove this, then what would happen if we go back to the browser? As you can see, nothing gets outputted, and this is because obviously if we go back here, now toString doesn't have any items which are only associated with this items property from the parent constructor. But because we've overwritten this parent constructor, we're not calling the parent constructor at all, passing these items. These items will never be associated with this items property. In order to do it, we would have to reverse to what we had, calling parent scope resolution operator, and then parent constructor passing the arguments to it. If we now save it, go back, you can see everything works the same way as before. Now, constructors, as well as any other methods within a class, can also take class instances as arguments. When you pass a class instance, or object in other words, to any method, including constructor, that is called dependency injection. When we pass in this to the constructor, we know that this specific class depends on this specific instance of the class. In other words, this class cannot function without this dependency. That's why we call it dependency injection. Dependency injection works with any other methods within a class as well. So if you have a method, you can pass the instance of the class to this method as well when you're calling it. But let's start with removing what we have here, this constructor from within the basket. What I'm also going to remove, if we go back to the collection, I think all this can stay the way it is. Back to the index.php, I'm going to remove all these examples here. We're going to keep all these require statements. And within our source directory, let's create the new class and call it formatter. We are going to replace these interfaces now with injectable dependencies. We convert these interfaces to the actual classes that contain the implementations of these methods. Okay, so we have a formatter. This class is going to be actually an interface. It's not going to be a class, it's going to be an interface. And it will say everything that implements me needs to have a public function called format. And it will take an array of items as an argument. Now let's add the doc block here. Returns mixed, yes, because it will be array, string, and so on. So format array. So that's our contract, our interface. We can now close it. Let's create first formatter, which is going to be of an array type, so array formatter. And this class implements formatter, so we obviously need to add this method. And from within this method, we simply return items. There we go. And we can save and close it. Next one is going to be called JSON formatter. This class also implements the formatter. So we need this method. And we're going to return JSON encode items. Same way as we did with all these methods. If we go back to the baskets, we are basically duplicating what we did here because we're going to remove these methods in just a moment. So JSON formatter, and actually here we're returning string. Let's go back to our array formatter and fix this mix. It's not mixed, it's array. That's what this method will return from this array formatter. JSON formatter is now done as well. We can save it. And the last one was going to be a string formatter. So string formatter. And it implements formatter. Let's add this method, format, and I'm going to go back to the basket and we have this toString here. Let's copy the content of this toString method and paste it inside of the format method now. Now we don't have access to these items, but we have argument items, so we're going to replace this this reference to these items from within a given class to this property, and then we implode it the way it is here, which is all fine. And if we go back to the basket, we need this join method as well. So let's copy this entire method and paste it within the string formatter, because it works, as I said before, it works exactly the same way. It's just going to be used in a different way. Okay, so now we have all our formatters ready. Now what's going to happen next? We're going to extend the collection because we need access to it. And I'm going to remove everything that I've got within the basket class. If I just remove it, we can now also remove this implements arrayable, JSONable, stringable. We're going to only extend the collection. And I'm going to recreate the constructor. So public function underscore construct. It automatically added items, but I also want to pass through the formatter. We are going to start with using array formatter and then call it just a formatter. That's fine. And let's instantiate this formatter. So first of all, what I'm going to do is this formatter equals formatter. And then we will call the parent constructor, passing these items through as an argument. So the collection will automatically associate them with the items property. But obviously we don't have this property formatter yet within the basket. So let's make it private and then formatter. And it's going to be an instance of array formatter. And everything seems to be working fine so far. So let's just add this doc block to the constructor as well. Now, array formatter can obviously format whatever we want. So let's, rather than later on calling, let's say, basket, formatter, and format method, let's create a public function format, which will basically return this formatter. And on this formatter, we obviously have this format method, and we will pass this items through as an argument to this method. So we can directly call this format without actually passing anything extra to it outside of this class. And let's add the doc block as well, format items. Save it. If we now go back to our index.php, we start with a basket, new basket, and now this basket now takes two arguments. First of all, it takes new instance of the array formatter, so new array formatter. We don't need any arguments, so we remove the brackets after the name of the class. And then second one is the collection of items we want to pass through. So I'm going to put this array here, and it's going to be banana again, let's say 2, lemons 3, and then apples, say 5, and then semicolon at the end. Let's just put these arguments each on new line. So this indented as well, just so we can clearly see what we're passing. So we're passing, first of all, first argument is this array formatter. Second one is this array. If we actually we don't save anything yet, we're going to echo now basket and then format. Now obviously we passed the array formatter. Array formatter returns an array when we format, so we can't just echo it. Let's use var underscore dump to see all these items. Save it now, preview everything in a browser, refresh the page, and we get uncaught exception array formatted. This is because we obviously didn't include it. We can remove all these arrayable, JSONable, stringable, and collection, and let's also remove them from here. So from arrayable, stringable, and JSONable. Let's remove these things, and now what we can do is add this. Let's add it after the basket require. We're gonna go for source and array formatter and semicolon at the end. Let's also add the formatter itself, so just the formatter, and let's add this JSON and string as well straight away. So JSON formatter and the string formatter, which we're going to be using in just a moment. Okay, save it and preview everything in a browser. And as expected, we have our array displayed in the array format. Okay, going back to the editor. Now, let's say a few days down the line, your boss is saying, okay, now we need to make sure that the basket is actually displayed in a different format. We want to change it to JSON format. Okay, so you go and change it to JSON formatter as the argument, but then you realize, oh, hold on a second, but basket only takes array formatter. Now, what am I going to do now? Well, we learned about interfaces. Interfaces as well as abstract classes can be used as arguments. So anything that extends the given abstract class or anything that implements the given interface can be used as a type hint for our argument, for our dependency injection. So rather than having this as array formatter, strictly declaring that we want to use array formatter, and then we're going to have problem if we want to use JSON or string formatter or any other formatter that we may create in the future, let's just use the formatter. the interface that all of these formatters will implement. This way, we can inject any formatter that we want. So now this JSON formatter is going to work just fine. Look what's going to happen. We're going back to the browser, refresh the page, and straight away we have it in a JSON format. We go back, we want to change to something else. We want to change to our string formatter. Just rename it, string formatter. An instance, or string, obviously, again, mistyping. String formatter works just fine. So you can change it at runtime, meaning when you actually instantiate the class, you can decide which formatter you want to use, which, as you can see, shows how useful these interfaces are, because you can just type hint it with the interface name, and then anything that implements this interface can be passed through as an argument and then used within the class itself. Now, this works fine. However, one problem with this approach is that right at the beginning, when you instantiate the object, you have to specify which formatter you want to use. But what if you would like to use multiple formatters with the same object instance? This is where method dependency injection probably would work a little bit better. There are situations where constructor dependency injection works better, like in the situation, let's say, when you have to send email or something like this, then you would just pass the instance of the mail implementation class. But in this case, when we're formatting the output, there might be a situation where you might want to format output in many different ways with the same instance of the class. So what I'm going to do is remove this first argument to the basket class. Obviously, this is going to be highlighted because we still require this formatter from within the constructor. I'm going to remove this dependency from this constructor, and now without this dependency, this constructor looks exactly the same as the one in the parent class, so we can pretty much remove this constructor altogether. And let's pass this dependency to the method of this basket class. Let's just add it to our doc blocks as well. And what I'm going to do from here is use this formatter rather than actually associated with our property. I'm just going to call format method directly on this formatter. So that's what I'm going to use. So use this instance which has been passed through as an argument and injected to this method, and then call format method on this instance, passing the items which were associated with our items property when we actually instantiated the basket class, which extends this collection, obviously. So let's go back to our index.php. Now this highlight is gone, but we have this method call highlighted. So what we need to do now is simply pass instance of whatever formatter we want to use, say array formatter for this first one. And again, we're not passing any arguments to array formatter. It doesn't have any constructor, so I remove the brackets at the end. You can keep them. There's nothing wrong about having them here, but because there's no constructor, I tend to remove them. So save it, preview it in the browser, and then there it goes. It works very well, exactly the same way as before, but now we are a little bit more flexible because I can duplicate this line, and using the same instance of the object, I can just output the same items in JSON format, for instance. Save it, preview in the browser, and now we've got array and then JSON format, and I can also use obviously the last one which we have, which is the string format as well. So string formatter back here, and we have all three different formats, the same items but displayed in three different formats. So as you can see, depending on how you are going to use the dependency, sometimes it might be better to inject the instance to the method that you're actually calling rather than a constructor, but in there will be many situations where constructor might be a better option because you might be using exactly the same instance of the injected dependency throughout your class, regardless of what method you call within this class. Okay, so that's everything in this video. I hope this has explained a little bit better how useful the interfaces really are. And the same way as we did with the interface, you can do it exactly the same way with the abstract classes. So this type hint here, this injected instance of the class could also be represented by the abstract class. So any classes that will extend it will be able to be passed to be injected as a dependency to this method or the constructor.